All right, let's dive into something huge, a core belief most of us just never really question. This idea that we absolutely need a government for national defense. In this explainer, we're going to unpack a really sharp critique from anarcho-capitalist philosophy that says this whole idea, well, it might just be a powerful illusion.
You know, we all just kind of accept it, right? A country needs an army run by the state to keep everyone safe. It just feels like basic common sense. But what if that whole concept, a state-run army, isn't actually the solution? What if it's a big part of the problem itself?
So here's the really provocative claim we're digging into today. The idea that a state army is necessary isn't some law of physics. The argument is that it's a story, a carefully built myth that the state tells us all to justify its own power and its very existence.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this argument, we got to understand where it's coming from. Anarcho-capitalism is a political philosophy that, and this is the key part, imagines a world without a state at all. Instead, free markets and private companies would handle everything. And I mean everything, even things like police and, yes, national defense.
So how in the world does a state convince millions of people that it's absolutely essential for their defense? Well, according to this argument, the very first tool it uses is language.
Think about it like this. It's a kind of takeover using words. The argument goes that, historically, lots of services were handled privately. But when you relabel something like defense as a public good or something strategic, you're framing it as a job that only the state can possibly do. It's a pretty clever way to build a monopoly, not through force, but just by changing a few words.
And once that language is set, it helps create what the philosophers call a giant logic loop. It's like a circular argument that holds the entire system up.
Okay, let's walk through the logic just like we're always taught. First question. Why do we need a state?
And the answer you always hear is, well, to defend us from big organized threats. Yeah, that sounds pretty reasonable on the surface.
Right, but let's push that a little. What exactly are these big organized threats we're supposed to be so afraid of? And here it is. This is where the argument pivots. The biggest, baddest, most organized threats out there are other states.
And boom, there's the loop. It just closed. We need a state to protect us from another state. See the problem? The cure and the disease are the same kind of thing. The argument is basically that the state is selling you protection from other people who are in the exact same business.
Now, this viewpoint does not pull any punches. It draws a pretty direct line from the modern state back to historical raiders with this quote. The point being made is that, hey, at least the Vikings were honest that they were there to plunder. The argument says the modern state has the same basic impulse, to protect its own ability to tax people, but it just dresses it up in fancy language like national defense.
Okay, so setting aside the circular logic for a second, there's also a really practical problem here. Even if you buy the premise, the modern nation-state might just be the completely wrong size to get the job done right.
It's this one-size-fits-none kind of dilemma. On one hand, you've got lots of states that are just too small to be a real defense force. I mean, can you imagine Luxembourg actually fending off an invasion from France? It's just not going to happen. But then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have giant states, like the US, that are often too huge and slow to effectively fight off small, fast-moving threats like terrorist cells or cyber attacks.
And this whole idea of an enemy, who exactly is that? The definition seems to change with the political weather. Groups that were yesterday's allies against the Soviets are today's biggest enemies. Countries that were bitter rivals for centuries are now close partners. You see this constant shifting, which suggests that the enemy isn't some fixed, objective threat. It's a political label that changes whenever it's convenient for the state.
So, if the logic is a loop, and the scale is all wrong, you have to ask one last really critical question. Who is all this defense spending and action really for? Who's actually benefiting from all this?
And this is where the argument delivers its final punch. It claims that national defense is really just a nice-sounding phrase, a euphemism, for a system that's designed to protect the wealth and power of the people already in charge, not the average citizen.
So let's break that down. Who are we talking about here? Well, the politicians who get to wield power, the famous military-industrial complex that makes a fortune from war and conflict, big corporations that get special deals and protection, And in some places, you've got military leaders or a so-called deep state that controls huge parts of the economy, all under the convenient cover of national security.
So if we boil this whole critique down to one central idea, it's this. State-run defense isn't some universal public good that helps everybody equally. It's a powerful ideological weapon, a tool used to justify the state's monopoly on power and to serve the interests of a very small group of people.
And that leaves us with a really tough final question to think about. If national defense isn't this neutral service that protects us all, then we have to ask a much harder question. Who actually gets to decide what, and more importantly, who is worth defending?